Oh, yeah, here we go. Here we go. That's better. Okay, here we are. Everybody in the house. Great to see everyone tonight. Yes, thank you. A little round of applause. Let's all just ground a little bit together. How does that sound? After the freezing cold, let's just put both feet on the ground. Yes, yes. Just breathe in through the nose a little bit. Maybe exhale from the mouth. Yes, yes. Everyone just bringing it into the room here together. It's an act of magic that we survived the cold and made it here at all. Yes, yes. Just everyone bringing their energy into their bodies and into this room here in Brooklyn, New York, where we are. All the beautiful humans. Yes, okay, we're here. Yay. All right, my name is Susie Baker. I'm one of the co-founders of the Psychedelic Assembly, and I am joined by my two lovely co-founders, Miss Kat Lakey and Mrs. Abby Lyle. And together we are the Psychedelic Assembly. And I'm gonna pass the mic over to Abby to explain to y'all a little bit about who we are and what we do.
Hi, everyone. For those of you who don't know, the Psychedelic Assembly is a community organization focused on education and connecting people around the topic of consciousness expansion. So we host all different sorts of events across all different neighborhoods here in New York and also in some other cities around different education around different psychedelic substances, also psychedelic adjacent topics like the Magick event we're all here for tonight. And then we also do social events and we also have parties. So our next Reset alcohol-free dance party is coming up on January 2nd. If you haven't been to one before, they are a ton of fun, so please check it out. And our community is supported by our wonderful members. So if you come out to a lot of our events, if you like and appreciate our community and what we're building, please consider becoming a member to get discounts, access, or free access to all of our events and a variety of other great perks. And now back to Susie to tell you more about the space we're in and the speaker we have tonight.
Thanks, Abby. Yes, thank you to all the members I see out in the audience tonight. Yes, so we are the Psychedelic Assembly, but where the heck are we right now? What is this place? This place is so cool. We are in Zero Space, an amazing next generation production and creative studio that we are absolutely thrilled to be in. Zero Space is truly at the forefront of creative technology, and they specialize in integrating digital, virtual, and live content, and they're bringing together arts, technology, filmmaking, along with like community building here in Brooklyn, and they do regular meetups and workshops, so definitely check out their website for events that they do, and we're just really, really grateful to be partnering with them tonight. Huge shout out to John and Jay for making this happen tonight, and we're thrilled to hopefully begin a series of speaker talks here. So yes. So a lot of you guys have been asking, why magic? Where does the intersection of magic and psychedelics, what is that? And really, magic is so psychedelic and psychedelics are magic. And as I am just a seeker of these things and have a lot of excitement and passion around them, I am not the expert, which is why you're all here tonight, because we have brought someone out who is the expert. So our speaker tonight is one of the most literate and grounded voices working in esoterica, mysticism, and the occult. Today, he's a PEN award-winning historian, the author of Occult America, The Miracle Club, Modern Occultism, and Practical Magic. He's written for the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, and Time. He hosted, wrote, and produced the documentary the Kabbalion, filmed in Egypt, which premiered as the #3 documentary on iTunes. Check it out for show. And he is a former vice president and editor-in-chief at Penguin Random House, where he published the works of David Lynch and many more. His writing has been translated into 15 languages, and he is censored in China. And we are truly honored to have him with us tonight. So without further ado, please join me in giving a very warm and magical welcome to our speaker for the evening, Mitch Horowitz.
Thank you. Thanks, y'all. It's great to see you. I am part of the psychedelic adjacency of the Psychedelic Assembly's programming, but I must first say a deep word of thanks to tonight's organizers, Susie Baker and Kat Lakey, and everybody at Psychedelic Assembly and Zero Space. They've been just such a wonder to work with, and a great thanks to my fiancée, Jacqueline Castel, who is here, wonderful filmmaker and responsible for so much. And I'm grateful to all of you. I know that your time and resources have many pulls and demands on them, and I'm very grateful to you all for being here tonight. Although I said something about being psychedelic adjacent, I am very aware that many of you in this room experiment with psychedelic substances as means of self-development, and I'm very applauding of that. And I feel that that is a vital urgency as we complete the first quarter of the 21st century. People are under tremendous amounts of stress. I don't think there was ever a good old days for humanity, but everybody has his or her own stories of the enormous amounts of stress that our present culture loads upon the individual. And I believe very strongly, and I'm going to be talking about this over the course of this evening's presentation, that the individual is in need of accelerants in terms of self-development. And I see psychedelics as among those accelerants. I must tell you, over the course of my career, I have woven in and out of a great many different esoteric groups. I've studied with people who I consider to be intellectually very sound and possessed of gravity. And from time to time, they might make a statement to me like, there's no shortcut, or you're too outward looking. And my entire career, in a certain sense, has been an act of rebellion against that thinking. I consider it ultimately ersatz seriousness. In fact, I am interested in shortcuts, I am interested in accelerants, and I am interested deeply in the wishes of the individual, which require no apology, no explanation, no redirection. In fact, one of the ways that I think our present therapeutic and alternative spiritual and traditional spiritual cultures very often fail the individual is in trying to almost take your own questions and wishes away from you, as if you, the mature, sensitive, seeking individual, somehow needs to be redirected or recalibrated to understand what's really valuable. I break with that. Years ago, a scholar of Kabbalah referred to me as his outward-looking brother, And I knew what he was saying, and I didn't like it, but I sat with it, and I said to myself, do I need fixing? Do I need recalibrating? Am I too focused on the outward world? And it was helpful to me in a certain way because I came to the determination at that time that it's artifice to draw a line of demarcation between inner and outer, personality and essence, higher and lower, ego and some other greater self. Where would that line of demarcation be drawn exactly, and how do you know when you've crossed over to whatever the wrong side of it is supposed to be? I contend that life is one whole, and that what we describe as the world we cannot see and the world we can see are descriptions of, we'll say, a yin-yang, or one entire piece of fruit. If you take an apple and you slice it in two, there's not a difference between those two halves. They're not exactly the same, just as the branch is not exactly the same as the tree, but they are the same essential parts. And I believe very strongly that the essence of life, the purpose of life, at least at this point in my search, is generativity, creativity, broadly defined, broadly defined. You can define self-expressiveness or creativity in whatever manner suits you, and I believe that a lot of the low-grade depression and ennui and anxiety and sorrow that we feel in our culture that sends us complaining every Thursday afternoon to our shrink and talking and talking and talking, and sometimes it just seems to be a grinding end to itself. I think that a lot of what the individual is experiencing in that situation, speaking from personal testimony, and I can't imagine any life is exclusive, is a paucity of generativity, creativity, self-expression. And I don't ever want to be in a situation, and I will never be in a situation, of telling you, the individual, or telling my neighbor, or telling myself that the thing desired is somehow wrong or superficial or requires recalibration or redirection or is coming from some false I that's inside you. I think that the human wish to express when it's stymied is the entire crisis of our lives. I feel that this is expressed in our most primeval spirituality, our earliest spirituality. And one of the things I'm interested in at this point in my search is really trying to get in touch with some of humanity's earliest spiritual expressions. By spirituality, I mean extraphysicality. I mean the gambit that we make that flesh and bone, while it's profoundly important, these are the forms in which we're living and expressing ourselves right now, is not the wholeness of life, that there is an unseen psychical dimension whose impacts and events and even other intelligences can be felt and expressed on and through us. I get a little concerned that some modern magical occult practice, and by magical, I mean causative ritual. So it can be prayer, it can be working with sigils, which I'll say something about. It can be any kind of ceremonial effort to cross over to that space of psychical causation. I get concerned that some of our magical traditions have developed with an excess of liturgy, complexity, ceremony, whereas the point really is that a thirsty person wants water, not an ornate recipe around procuring water, but water. And I think if we dial back to some of our most primeval spiritual expressions, which have, it must be admitted, reached us in fragments. A lot of stuff gets destroyed across millennia, but the fragments that have reached us, which I'm going to talk about tonight, speak to a glorious, glorious simplicity in magic, in causative ritual, which is what I'm trying to return to in my own efforts, which I share with you tonight. One of the most emotional discoveries for me in my search has been the existence of a spirituality, not only among our earliest human ancestors, but among our Neanderthal ancestors. And I want to say this very plainly and very clearly. Our Neanderthal ancestors are the oldest known antecedent to humanity. They lived for hundreds of thousands of years. They were around longer than we've been around, and the last of them are believed to have died out about 40,000 years ago, based on the best records that we're able to assemble. And the Neanderthals were a lot like us, but they were not us. They were different physically. They had a different gait. They had a different spine. They had a different cranium. They were a lot like us, but they weren't us. And they had a spirituality. And it was a spirituality, and this is extraordinary, it was a spirituality that everyone in this room would recognize, ancient as it was. When we use the term prehistory, we mean before writing. This was prehistory. Starting in the mid-19th century, archaeologists discovered, and we now have hundreds of them, these statuettes or figurines that Neanderthal men and women would craft. They were maybe 4 or 5 inches high. They were bulbous, feminine forms. Large pendulous breasts, a large belly. They almost looked a little bit like the chubby Buddha statues that began to emerge in China in the 11th century. These are things that, at least when I was a kid, you would grow up and you might see at a Chinese restaurant. It's the enormous tubby Buddha, smiling and jolly. They looked a little bit like that, but they were discernible feminine forms, and they may have been pregnant. And it's theorized that these may have been fertility statues or appeals to a fertility goddess. In the mid-19th century, archaeologists, drawing upon their cultural reference point, termed these things Venus figurines. Obviously, Venus, the Hellenic god of love, would not appear for millennia, but they were drawing upon classical language that was available to them. In addition to these Venus figurines, which were about 4 or 5 inches high, very important for members of a hunter-gatherer society. They had to move around. They were on the move, and they were taking life, obviously, day by day. They had talismans, things that we would recognize, small little bits of statuary that they would hang around their neck, maybe using an animal entrail. These talismans sometimes were eagle talons or bear claws, and they were believed to have been charms that were supposed to bring a person luck in the hunt. The difference between surviving and dying for our most ancient ancestors. And what's extraordinary is that if you look at these Venus figurines, you can recognize them instantly as petitionary objects, devotional objects. It's so extraordinary to me because it says something about the invisible world. It says something about our spirituality, which is that it's not culturally conditioned. These were our pre-human ancestors. They had a different brain chemistry. They had a culture so different from ours, it's like imagining life on another planet. And yet they had a vivid, surviving practice of appealing to the unseen. And it would be recognizable, is recognizable to us in the 21st century. So it suggests to us that spirituality is not just some culturally conditioned thing, or is not just what some headset-wearing TED Talk deliverer would tell you is, well, it's just the frontal cortex lighting up, and that's all it is. No, it's not that. It's realization, because it's older than we are on this planet, literally. And it's amazing that we've retained fragments to it. Now, dig this. I very often ask myself, if magic works, if prayer works, if an appeal to the invisible world works, what's the trigger? You know, what kind of gets us there? And one of the reasons why I like what many of you are doing in terms of experiments with psychedelics is that among the things you're doing is you're bypassing the rational mind. The rational mind is very important. We wouldn't be here without it. The lights wouldn't be on. But it has its limits. It has its limits. And we, as modern Western people, have gotten so attached to the rational mind, done wonderful things with it and bad things with it. Yin and yang rules the world, as above, so below, that we've neglected that aspect of psyche that is different, distinctive from the rational. Doesn't necessarily supersede it, doesn't necessarily precede it, but exists and is different. And I think that within magic, I believe that the core trigger that gets you where you want to go is the sexual urge, which I think is something that we experience as the creative urge. It's the creative urge, really. It's life-seeking replication through us. And we define sexuality, or we have until this point, very narrowly. Some people would define it as procreation, and it certainly is that. Some people would define it as pleasure, the search for pleasure, and it certainly is that. But it's something more than that. And I think you find whispers of this in a place where a lot of people don't look for magic, but we should, and that is in the writing of Plato and some of the early Hellenic philosophers. It wasn't as if the Hellenic philosophers or the writing of theirs that survived and reached us necessarily provided some sort of an expository guide. We have exposition from antiquity that's reached us. Sometimes it's called technical hermetica, Neoplatonism. We have magical texts that have emerged from the Egyptians, the Maya. So it's not that we have a paucity of it, but we sometimes overlook the fact that it's woven very beautifully into some of our great works, and we tend to neglect it. Like, for example, there's a whole big intellectual movement online around Stoicism. The primary Stoic philosopher was Marcus Aurelius. Well, Marcus Aurelius, beautiful philosopher, happened to worship Jupiter. I'm not necessarily saying that you need to worship Jupiter if you're getting down with Marcus Aurelius, but it should be kept in mind that that was in the background of his point of view. So you find interesting things within the works of some of the Hellenic philosophers if you're looking for them. So I've said that sexuality is a bridge in magic. Now, in Plato's Dialogue Symposium, Socrates tells a story, and the story Socrates tells is meeting an Egyptian priestess named Diomedea. And Diomedea tells Socrates the following story, shares with Socrates the following wisdom as he repeated it to us. And she explains to him that from the Egyptian point of view, it's probably a Greek-Egyptian point of view, although it could predate Greek activity in Egypt, the god Eros, the god of sexuality, who the Romans later termed Cupid, and we put on Hallmark cards. But the god Eros is the messenger, is the mitigator between the individual and the gods. And so Dionysia explains to Socrates, and Socrates explains to Plato, that if you make an appeal to Eros, to passion, to the god of sexuality, Eros will carry your wish to the gods. We see this exact same cycle replicated in a more early modern form in the Roman Catholic Church, where the saints are supposed to be a mitigating force between the individual and what Western culture later came to call God. But that conception wasn't exactly what was present in the Hellenic era. But what was being said, I think, should be attended to very carefully and should be used. And I believe that there is a methodology called sex transmutation that is very, very useful to the individual. It is the simplest form of sex magic. We often hear the term and phrase sex magic, and there are many, many different practices, some of them tantric, some of them Western and modern. I would say that what I'm about to describe to you is not only exquisitely simple, but honors ideas that you will find across traditions, including tantric, Vedic, Buddhist, Kabbalistic, and Hellenic. And so it's, in my estimation, the purest, most legitimate, and simplest method that touches upon all these traditions and honors this primeval insight of the magical causative nature of sexuality. Now, the principle is this. The sexual urge within you is, yes, it's an urge for pleasure and physical release. Yes, it's an urge for procreation, but that's not all it is. It can be understood as the urge of life itself seeking replication through you, the individual. And I spoke earlier about the creative impulse, the great, great need for human expression, and all of that, it so follows, is life seeking replication through you, the individual. This is among the reasons why I take people's personal desires, wishes, aims with grave seriousness and respect. Here is a method. It is a method that you can and really must try privately. It's not something you need to share with anybody. You don't need to talk to your boyfriend or girlfriend or spouse or shrink or anybody else about it. It's better to keep it private. There's a power in that. When you feel the sexual urge, the typical means of satisfaction are physical. It might be self-pleasuring, might be with a partner. You might be riding the subway and you like, well, this is going to have to wait. You know, this is not something that can be satisfied right here and now, unless you're one of those very special people. And that's normally how we socially treat sexuality. There's another way. When you feel that sexual urge, you can, at a time and place of your own choosing and with total privacy, through a mental shift of focus, apply that urge to whatever cherished or important task sits in front of you. That task could be going on a job interview. That task could be completing a work of art, a piece of writing, or, for God's sake, it can be doing your taxes. It can be doing a home repair. In one of my books, I write about using it to do a home repair. we have 2 sons in our home, and for a period of time, they were absolutely obsessed with pulling down these curtains that we had very carefully hanged. And these are adolescent boys. Why the need to pull down these curtains, I don't know. But it was a fixation, and they were very successful at it. And so I used sex transmutation as a means of repairing our beautiful antique walls when these curtains were pulled down, thus damaging our lovely home. I'm not a whiz when it comes to home repair, but when you use the sexual urge at the back of tasks that are important to you, of whatever nature, you will add intelligence, acumen, focus, creativity, additional strength, additional ability. It's really something that must be tried to be experienced. And it's very, very important for me to point out to you that there's nothing about this that requires abstaining from the sexual act. It's not a call to abstinence. I was describing all this one day to my friend Duncan Trussell on his podcast, and he said, "Oh no, don't tell me I have to stop jerking off." And I said, no, relax, that is not necessary. It's something for you to do of your own choosing. I mentioned privacy. It should be done with privacy. I just want to make a side note. A lot of times in occult practice, you'll hear about the power of silence. I think it was the great occult revivalist Eliphas Levi who wrote that the code of occultism is to will, to do, to try, and to remain silent. And silence seems to have this romance about it. It's secretive. And I asked myself, why silence? You know, why? And I think understanding the reason behind something enhances the effects of the practice. So when I ask why, it's not just an academic or scholastic exercise. I really want to know. I've come to the conclusion that we talk about things not infrequently to dilute them. If we suffer a sorrow, we talk to a friend or we talk to a shrink to dilute it. And that has a place. That absolutely has a place. But one must be very, very careful with that, because if you're talking about something to dilute it, you don't want to use that method inadvertently to describe some new experiment, some new little bonfire that you're building. It's almost the equivalent of dumping a cup of water on it. And furthermore, and this is very important, and this is going to link to what I turn to next, people destroy things. When you talk about stuff too readily and too easily, you have to be precious and careful who you share your ideas with. If you go to somebody who is your friend and you tell this person, what I really want to do is such and such, you've all had the terrible experience. Everyone in this room has had the terrible experience of confiding something to a friend. Save us from our friends. Or confiding something to a relative, or sharing your plans with some schmo seated next to you at Thanksgiving dinner, and they will run it down, and they will piss it away, because people are destructive. It's just part of life. There's a hostility in people. There's a destruction in people. Why did he say this? Why did she say this? I used to ask those questions all the time until I came to grips with the simple fact that, you know, we as a human species create and destroy. I'm describing something that you can use sex transmutation to create. But just as easily, people derive a sick and perverse and grotesque thrill from destruction. You build a sandcastle on the beach, some guy will come over and kick it. Why? I mean, we could psychoanalyze him, but there's a hostility in human nature, and I ask you to be careful of it. Be careful of it. I personally believe that we, as a human community, sustain too many relationships Our ancient ancestors, I mean, my God, we encounter more people over social media in a day than the ancients from any culture would encounter perhaps across their entire lives. I think we sustain too many relationships, and we have to be precious and careful about not oversharing what we're doing, and that feeds into the next thing I'm going to say. In addition to the sexual urge, the procreative urge, broadly defined, I think the other factor that enacts the generative abilities of the psyche, that gets us across that bridge, so to speak, to the invisible world, is an authentic wish. And I ask each of you in this room, silently, what do you really, really want in life? Completely without embarrassment. And I ask this with some urgency for the following reason. It's an odd thing to say because our culture, on one hand, is so licentious and consumer-driven, and the selfie is our chief form of visual communication, and there's maybe a self-obsession in our culture, a self-fixation, and this gets encouraged by social media. I participate in it as much as everyone. But at the same time, we internalize, maybe as a result of some of that, we internalize vast amounts of peer pressure. And this peer pressure becomes so conditioned and so internalized that we repeat it to ourselves within. And we think we're being self-honest, whereas we are repeating within products of the circumstance of peer pressure. And so when I ask, what do you want? I encourage you, if you wish, to dial back to your earliest retained memories. Because within that is a mixture of pain and joy, tragedy and euphoria. And that's where your wish is. Because it seems to me that by the time a child, and this may be even earlier nowadays due to social media, but by the time a child reaches age 9 or so, that peer pressure becomes concretized within that individual. And they start to talk and act like a certain subculture, or like the greater culture at large. Something precious gets lost, maybe around age 9, maybe 9, 10, and that may be earlier nowadays due to social. And I tell you, and I know this is true for everybody in this room, because no life is exclusive. I have memories, the most vivid memories of age 4, where maybe my friends and I would be playing a game, but I'd be playing a different game in my head than they might be playing. And I'd be imagining myself in a world, a setting that was distinct for every child in that little play group. And there is within that area something very, very authentic about your wish. I think that we, as a culture, repeat things within that we think are original to us, that we think are primal to ourselves, but that are tainted, really tainted with the artifice of peer pressure. And again, if you talk about your wish to people, they will take that wish from you. I remember one time a shrink said to me, what did I want out of life? And I told him, and he said, but that's superficial. And I said to him, Scott, you've known me how many years? Do you really think I'm superficial? Instead of calling it superficial, maybe we need to examine our own concepts of what superficial really means. Because I've never met anybody who didn't have a deep-seated need that they were enunciating behind something that they wanted very, very deeply. And if you don't identify that thing to yourself, you forsake all of your power as a human being. And there are many of us who go through our lives, or decades and decades and decades of our lives, forsaking that power that comes with the absolute unembarrassed honesty of disclosing the wish within. And please, I ask you, don't condition it. You know, I'm very interested in New Thought, the tradition of mind causation, and every time somebody in New Thought comes up with an affirmation, it always includes something of, and therefore I can be of service to the world. And it's, let the world worry about itself. You know, like, what do you want? I believe very strongly in the ethic of reciprocity, but ethics determine a process, a way of life, not the end point of life. Let the world worry about itself for 15 minutes. You worry about what the thing is that you really wish for. And take some time with it. You know, take time to sit in private, to ask yourself that question. And when you do come to what you feel is true, write it down. Write it down. I'm a big believer in note cards. People make fun of me for this. You know, it's like Moses carried index cards down from Mount Sinai in my religion. And there's something powerful in writing a thing down, not just anything, but a thing that you feel with all your guts, because it's the nascence of creativity. Think of it for a second. When you reach that wish, and when you write down that wish, and you put it on a note card, however particulate that form is, something is there in a tactile, functional, real-world way that wasn't there before. It's the nascence of creativity. Treasure it, value it. Get out a roll of clear packing tape, as I often do, and wrap that thing in clear packing tape so you can carry it around with you. You know, the whole basis, you've all heard the term chaos magic. Chaos magic, which I'm going to say something about, is really, there's an adjacency between chaos magic and chaos theory. And chaos theory, very simply put, is a mathematical theory that holds that one particulate change in a system changes everything. So you'll hear this popularized sometimes through the expression that a butterfly flapping its wings in Beijing can affect the weather in Houston, Texas. So, and that is true. I mean, you'd have to work it out by theorem, but the idea, the basis is that a particulate change alters the whole. Why am I so confident that's true? Well, look at computer programming. You know, you introduce one wrong dot, asterisk, numeral into a computer program, and everything goes to hell. That's chaos theory. It's very similar with magic. So I take very seriously the idea of these small, nascent steps that actually represent a particulate change to the whole. Sigil magic is the most popular form of chaos magic. Many of you have heard of sigil magic. It was pioneered in its earliest form by an English artist who died in the mid-20th century, Austin Osman Spare, and another English artist and occultist named Peter Carroll brought it into a more finely sharpened place. But the idea essentially is this, and it coalesces with what I've been describing. You write down a sentence of something that you want. It doesn't have to be something monumental. If you're like me, it's usually something monumental, but it can be something that's simpler. And you use a method, of which there are several, to eliminate superfluous letters in this little sentence of yours. Some people will eliminate repeating letters. Some people will eliminate consonants. Some people will eliminate vowels. And then you take the remaining letters and you fashion them into a kind of abstract symbol. a symbol that you want to make a little magical looking. And I think that one method that can help with that is that you cross out all the vowels and you just preserve the consonants. Because the consonants that we have, even in English language writing, do bear a certain resemblance to the earliest cuneiform methods of writing. Our earliest ancestors, paper didn't exist until maybe 900 AD, and so our earliest forms of writing were usually inscriptions on bones, on stones, on turtle shells, on clay, later on papyrus and various leaves and things that started to resemble paper. But the earliest writing that we possess, some of which is reflected in the Chinese oracle, the I Ching, which are broken and unbroken lines assembled into hexagrams, lines of 6, humanity had to carve its earliest writing. That looks more close to our consonants than it does to vowels. So I recommend taking your sentence of aim, crossing out the vowels, keeping only the consonants, and assembling that into what is called a sigil, which is Latinate for little sign. It's a little magical symbol. And then the method goes, and this harkens directly to what I was saying about the bridge of sexual energy, about the nature of the wish. You then bring yourself to sexual climax or some other state of euphoria, focusing on the symbol. The idea being that when you're in a state of euphoria, this can be done using psychedelics, this can be done bringing yourself to sexual climax, it can be done with meditation, it can be done with ecstatic dance, it can be done with a mix of these things. The idea is that when you're focusing on your little sigil and you bring yourself into a state of ecstasy, you are investing yourself and your psyche into this purpose, this thing, this wished for thing, in a manner that bypasses the rational mind. And that can be extremely powerful. I believe very, very strongly that we as human individuals have access to psychical energies that will sometimes go under terms like ESP or clairvoyance or intuition or instinct or telepathy, and that these things are there all the time, waiting for proper channeling. It was the psychical researcher Frederick Myers who coined the term telepathy. The suffix of that word is pathos, telepathy. The idea being that we can transmit passion. It goes back to some of the earliest ideas that I am referencing. And I write a lot in my books about contemporary psychical research, of which I'm a big advocate. And I'm not going to get into it tonight because we could dedicate a whole evening to it. And you can read about it in many, many books and articles that I've produced. But the fact is, the great unacknowledged vista that we have reached as a human community in the early 21st century is that we absolutely possess generations of world-class, heavily vetted, heavily replicated, meta-analyzed data validating the ESP thesis, validating the capacity of you, the individual, to glean information in methods that go outside of ordinary sensory experience, and to convey information, including emotions, in methods that go outside of ordinary sensory experience, and even to demonstrate a psychokinetic effect tested for and replicated in laboratory settings. You will read about exactly none of this on Wikipedia, and that is one of the crises of our time. There are many problems with the flow of information in our world. And one of the problems with the flow of information is that what I am describing to you, which is as vital and accurate as the very words I'm speaking, has been culturally suppressed by a more or less activist, materialist philosophy that sees any suggestion of extraphysical influence in the flesh and blood physical world as the ultimate heresy, that religion and myth and spirituality can be spoken of in poetry. Yes, okay, we let Ginsberg sneak in the door, we let Burroughs sneak in the door, but God damn it, no one else. And these ideas are the domain of the poet, the theologian, and sure, you can have your churches, and sure, you can have your Zen and your transcendental meditation, but don't you dare suggest that any of this material actually has a tactile impact within the physical world, and it does, and it does. And the reason I care so deeply about psychical and ESP research is because, as I was saying earlier, if you understand the actuality of something and the why of something, it increases the impact of that thing in your life, in your existence. And it's so critically important to me that people realize that we are not without greater devices in this world. And I want to describe one of these devices to you, and this is far fucking out, and it's new in terms of human discovery. And it's called retrocausality, and it has to do with changing the past. Within quantum physics, there's a field known as retrocausality that has nothing to do with cognition. It has to do with the observation that particle forms and other facets of our physical existence can and actually do travel backwards in time. You've probably heard of quantum entanglement, where particles and larger objects, sometimes at vast distances, will affect one another. This is what Albert Einstein referred to as spooky action at a distance. And he wasn't super happy when he was saying it, because Einstein's theory of special relativity holds that nothing can move faster than light. That's the way it is. And yet quantum entanglement is a process that exceeds light speed. So Einstein was not, towards the end of his life, an entirely happy camper about some of the data that was emerging from quantum physics. He wasn't closed to it, but he pointed out the fact that quantum mechanics and special relativity contradict one another, and they do contradict one another, because entanglement surpasses light speed. And we don't necessarily know the direction from which an influence is traveling within quantum entanglement. We have a mathematical formula called Bell's theorem that is intended to measure entanglement effects. But one of the things that Bell's theorem, as precious and vital as it is, doesn't tell us, well, Aretha Franklin used to have this song called Who's Zooming Who? You know, that's what it doesn't tell us. It doesn't tell us who's zooming who. It doesn't tell us where the effect is coming from. And the effect can be retrocausal in nature. In other words, it can seem to travel backwards in time, and there are actual particles, one of them is called the positron, that actually move backwards in time. They experience collisions, and they move back to a point of earlier observation. Is time travel real? I wouldn't be so quick to judgment on the matter. A very lovely clinical psychologist at Cornell University named Darrell K. Bem began to make the effort about 20 years ago as to whether these retrocausal effects occur within cognition. And Bem released a paper in 2011 called feeling the future. And this paper, which was a painstaking work of a decade-long study of precognition and retrocausality, produced findings in its 2 final experiments, experiments 8 and 9, that were absolutely extraordinary. And I'm going to describe them to you in the simplest possible terms. Bem and his colleagues asked their study subjects to take a very simple memory exam, an exam testing for recollection. The participants were asked to memorize a list of words and then repeat back to the experimenter the words that they were able to retain. Nothing remarkable occurred. We all have the ability. You say there's a list of 10 words somewhere. Yeah, you know, I'll look at it. I'll try to memorize it for 30 seconds or so. Maybe I'll remember 5 or 6 of the words. Very, very ordinary act of human cognition. He found, using a whole variety of control groups and methodology, that if you administered to people the exact same kind of test and administered the test, recorded the results, but added one wrinkle, which was that the subject continued to study the test, the word memorization, into the future, it spiked scores by 2 or 3 percentage points, something that's very statistically significant. So for an exam that you take at 5 o'clock on Thursday afternoon, you take your exam, you're finished, you hand it in or you submit it online or whatever it is you're doing, and then you continue to study for that exam in the future, there is an effect of what can be called a reaching backward in time, that spikes your score in the present. And when this report was released, and it was released in a very highly vaunted psychological journal, there was outrage. There were skeptic after skeptic in the New York Times talking about what an embarrassment this was to the entire field of clinical psychology, how outrageous this was, how crazy this was, etc., etc., etc. I was so convinced by the pushback once upon a time that I wrote to my friend Dean Radin, who's a parapsychologist, and I told him I was preparing a chapter in a book of mine called Daydream Believer about parapsychology, a field of which I'm a big advocate. And I said to Dean, I'm going to have to exclude the Bem experiments because I think they're probably considered compromised and non-replicable. And Dean wrote back, he's very understated and stoic. He wrote, the Bem results are fine. And so I thought to myself, are they? Are they? And so I waited 10 years to write about Bem's results. And in the ensuing 10 years, they were subject to a meta-analysis in which experiments that are different but very closely related are analyzed together. The data is pooled together. And this meta-analysis consisted of 90 experiments in 33 different labs in 14 different nations. And they were proven confirmatory. I'm not saying to you that every experiment worked. It didn't. And I'm not saying to you that a majority of experiments worked. They didn't. But the pooled data demonstrated the statistical impossibility of the spike results being random, being a mistake. This was 90 experiments in 33 different labs in 14 different countries. Those of you in this room who are involved in the sciences hardly need to be told how extraordinary it is to have that body of data. Every one of us are taking pharmaceuticals that have nowhere near that body of data. But we as a culture are like, it's just fine. But as soon as somebody uses the rules of the road in the strictest, most ardently applied way and comes up with something extraordinary, something that's not supposed to fit, the presence of an extraphysical, we'll call it, or metaphysical verity felt amid concrete ephemeral life, that is the ultimate outrage in our society up to this point, at least, and its downstream sources of information in journalism, popular reference, and so forth. Now, I want to say to you that this is a tool. This is a tool that I want to encourage you to use. I want to tell a very, very quick story and then move on. Several years ago, I was contacted by a Thai kickboxer named Spencer Hanley, and he was fighting a match outside of Houston, and it was coming up in 9 days. And he said, you know, I'm feeling good about my training, but I wonder if you can suggest anything that will help me with my mental game. And so I suggested to him a very simple exercise that I've written widely about called the 30-day mental challenge. It really just has to do with making an effort to direct your thoughts in productive, advancing, positive directions for 30 days. Some people have extraordinary results with it. And he said, well, listen, I'm down with that and I am going to do it, but I need something more short term. And I said to him, Spencer, this is short term. And we talked about retrocausality, and I explained that if you start this exercise now, 9 days before your fight, and you continue it for the prescribed full 30 days after your fight, there is a very great likelihood that there will be a reaching backwards effect that will help you with your mental game for that fight. And I'll guarantee you, nobody in your opponent's corner is talking to him about retrocausality. So this is your secret weapon. So he used it, and I'll never forget. I watched the fight. He came out, for some reason he was wearing these Hawaiian leis around his neck, and he came out totally relaxed, totally at ease. He was in command from the very beginning. He won, hands down, very respectful to his opponent. May have won anyway. And he came out, and his entry music, and as any of you know who watch combat sports, the entry music is usually this like ear-bleeding drill rap or techno metal. And he came out to the song Heaven is a Place on Earth. And one of the ringside announcers said, the fact that he's coming out to Belinda Carlisle makes me so happy. And 2 days later, without my having written about this, broadcasted this, talked about it, told anyone, 2 days later, I get 2 audio messages over Instagram from my high school crush, Belinda Carlisle, telling me, I'm a fan, I've been reading your books, I really dig your stuff, and I'm like 3, 2, 1, ready to die from happiness. And it's weird how life is. There are these hidden tendrils. There are these hidden tendrils of experience, and I've had other experiences advising people on the use of retrocausality. One of them I write about in Practical Magick. There was a woman going on a job interview to a religious organization. She really wanted the job. She aced the interview. She didn't get it. She's very disappointed. And I said to her, you know, look, just keep at it, keep at it. Keep prepping for the interview as if it's tomorrow. Just keep doing that. And a week later, and you can read the account in Practical Magick, I read about these things publicly. I use people's names because I believe in transparency. I want people to shadow me, check me out, call me out, you know, if I'm exaggerating, which I don't do. And about a week later, the boss man called her and said a lateral position had opened, same job, only this one had even more hours. You know, was she available for it? And coincidence, maybe. Happenstance, maybe. Did the retrocausal effort make any difference? I don't know. But I can tell you that these hidden tendrils of life repeat over and over and over, and they are backed up by a vast amount of both research literature and ancient, even primeval validation. To walk away from these things is to walk away from the wholeness of ourselves. These things must be experimented with. And the glorious thing is, you don't have to join anything. You don't have to put a label on yourself if you don't feel like it. You don't have to tell anybody what you're doing. You don't have to pay for anything. I mean, my God, my books are probably damn near pirated every place anywhere, so just, I hope you'll buy them, but you know, if you must. I'm being glib, but what I really mean to say is that these are things that I think are part of the primeval human experience that have been bled out of our culture, and they have been bled out of our culture by places where we sometimes go for solutions, like our alternative spiritual culture or our therapeutic culture. Don't get locked into these off-the-shelf ideas, into translations of translations of translations that tell you this is what you should be doing, because it's somebody else's decision. And I believe very, very strongly that we have to be making our own decisions in matters of the search. And I think that we can be inspired by the past, but we have to be very certain that our search is entirely our own. I believe strongly, and this harkens back to what I was describing to you about our Neanderthal ancestors and Venus figurines. I believe very, very strongly in fostering or seeking petitionary relationships with non-human or unseen or deific intelligences. I really venerate that. And I think that you can do that in a manner that doesn't bind you to congregational spirituality or to methods and hymns and ideas that you're reading from out of a book. One of my practices is spontaneous deity petition. I think that the act of prayer is, in fact, one that I really venerate and I take very, very seriously. And I believe that one of the things that gets in the way of the individual entering into a meaningful petitionary relationship with an unseen intelligence or deity is the kind of formalized, liturgical, ceremonial approach to prayer that we have been boxed into as a human community. I believe that when the prayerful impulse strikes you, and when you wish to reach out to a force or a deity that may have a name, from ancient literature, ancient religion, or something that speaks to you in a kind of instinctive way, act on it immediately. Act on it immediately. Fuck embarrassment. We don't have time for embarrassment in life. Obviously, I'm respectful to other people around me, but one of the figures I venerate is the figure of Prometheus, who mythologically is said to have stolen fire from the gods, brought that fire to earth, and given humanity the capacity to forge its own creative path along with its own destructive path. I think that friction is the price of creativity. To me, one of our founding creation myths of Adam and Eve in the garden is an appalling abrogation of the human situation. And I think that the Promethean and the satanic mythos have gotten wound into Genesis in an esoteric way through the snake in the garden, telling Eve, you know, if you eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, you've been told you're going to die. You're actually not going to die. And this gets overlooked in so many of our theologies. The snake told the truth. Adam and Eve didn't die. They were cast out of the garden, and they did suffer. But without that, they wouldn't be entitled to the term human. How can we be creative if we don't also wrestle with the destructive, as above, so below, yin and yang? It's the state of our nature. And it seems to me that when we are invoking the wish to reach that territory of the human experience that is psychical, that is extraphysical, and we reach for some sort of petitionary experience in that world, when you feel that urge, do not wait. In the New York Public Library, outside the vast reading room, there's a ceiling mural, as some of you might know, of Prometheus stealing fire from the gods, carrying that back down to earth. I have prayed before that mural. I have prayed before that mural. Once upon a time, many years ago, there was an old girlfriend from college who said, I wanted to come and say hi to you, but it looked like you were praying. And I said, yeah, fact. You know, obviously be respectful to people around you. They're having their own experiences, and they're entitled not to be disturbed. But don't let embarrassment deter you. And we have enough information in this world for you to announce your affinity with a deific figure. Maybe it'll be Eros, maybe it'll be Venus, maybe it will be something from the Vedic pantheon, maybe it'll be nothing at all, maybe it'll be chaos, maybe it'll be great infinity, which can be influenced in a particulate way, as we've been talking about. But you have the ability to make these decisions about where you want to reach out to. If you feel stuck and you feel like something in your life has really gone awry and has really gone astray, I want to share with you a practice of great effectiveness that exists within Kabbalistic tradition, Talmudic tradition, and also esoteric Buddhist tradition. And I look for parallel experiences. When you find that there are people separated by vast amounts of geography or language or practice or background, and they're doing the same thing, that to me puts you on the scent trail of truth. One of the practices that is actually very hallowed and is specifically mentioned in Talmud and within esoteric Buddhist tradition both, is that of changing your name. Changing your name. It's explicitly stated in Talmud that parents should be very, very careful around the name that they give to their child, because a name can be a direct cause of good and bad. And there are Orthodox and Hasidic Jews in this city who, if a child gets sick and for some reason recovery is distant in coming, they will change that child's name. Now, for some of us, a name change is impossible in terms of our day-to-day responsibilities. And I respect that. I respect that. I think making an ostentatious change of name at a certain age, at a certain point in life, can prove very, very difficult and might be a very legit barrier for people. But here is a wrinkle that I ask you to consider. You can change your name in private. You can change your name in secret. You can, for example, form a relationship with a deity or an unseen intelligence, and the name in which you converse with that being, which I consider as real as the words I'm now speaking, can be one of your choosing, can be one of your own. And you can harbor and you can keep that secret private name that is a authentic reference to yourself in a manner that belongs not to our physical, outward, ephemeral world, but to the invisible world, to the psychical world, to that vast territory. And when you enter that territory, you enter it with that name. This is a very popular practice presently in Thailand, and it is a practice, as I referenced, from within esoteric Buddhism. And there was an article in the Wall Street Journal in 2012 that police in Thailand were having trouble with this, because sometimes people would commit crimes and then within the framework of esoteric Buddhism change their names, but they would do it overtly, and the cops had like a lot of trouble tracking them. So they've talked about various systems where they're going to regulate the changing of names so that people can't use it as a gaffe for the police. You don't have to go that far if you don't feel like it. but it is something that you could do in private. I offer all these things because I think that they speak directly to fulfilling needs that the individual feels, which are oftentimes the most deeply passionate plank on which we stand in life. And I want to close with one last practice, and then we're going to open up to exchange questions. Several years ago, on 4th of July weekend, I don't know what I was thinking, but I offered my social media followers free tarot readings online. And I was rather overwhelmed. And I spent about 72 hours doing tarot readings. I do a very, very simple reading, which I recommend, whatever deck you use. It's a very simple 3-card reading. You pull 3 cards, and you look within those 3 cards for a storyline. And this storyline can work forwards, it can work backwards, or you can get something called, what I call wings, where the cards on either the left or right side of the center card maybe are informing the center card. I've found the practice one of extraordinary efficacy, and in my book, Practical Magic, I have a chapter called The Logic of Tarot, where I write a defense of tarot as an oracular or divinatory tool. I won't go into it in detail now, but I think that when you use a pictographic device like tarot or I Ching, and you pull these so-called random images, the very randomness itself is a kind of snapshot of everything that's going on in time at that given moment, subject to change, sure enough, but a kind of snapshot. This has something to do with retrocausality, and has something to do with the illusory nature of linear time. You know, we know, for example, that time bends in conditions of extreme gravity or extreme velocity. Many of you have heard that a being who is traveling at or near light speed will experience time slowing down from the perspective of those of us on Earth. Not only is that literally true, but I don't know why this has not been more widely reported, but it has been reported. Astronauts in our own era who are moving nowhere near the velocity of light speed, they do actually experience minute but measurable reductions in the aging process based solely on velocity. Einstein was entirely and empirically correct that linear time is a necessary illusion for us 5 sensory beings to get through life. But it's not the only game in town. And I think when we speak of randomness, such as making a random drawing of tarot cards or a random throw of coins that conjures up a hexagram within the I Ching, I think there's a snapshot of great efficacy there. I found that during that very strange 72 hours in which I had committed to doing hundreds of tarot readings and didn't want to disappoint anybody, over and over people were coming to me with the same kinds of questions. Most of the time the questions were about romance, money, career, romance, money, career. Once in a while somebody would ask about health, and once in a while somebody would ask about his or her spiritual search. But I would say maybe 85% of the questions were romance, money, career. And some people were embarrassed about this and said, I'm sorry, you know, I know this is sort of not very spiritual of me. And my response was the same to every one of them. Do not be embarrassed, because, again, let me dial back for a second to what I was saying at the outset. This is the playing ground in which your precious life occurs. This is the playing ground of creativity, of passion, of desire, of wish. Where is the line of demarcation that separates that from the extraphysical or the unseen? Sure, we can call it temporal or ephemeral, but is it? You know, I don't know that. There are acts that we take all the time in this life that have reverberating effects. I'm in no position to describe something as somehow limited and less important. So I encourage these questions. In fact, I specifically encourage them because I think that people should be frank about where their passion is. If it's something else, then be frank about that. And so everybody came to me to a great extent with romance, finance, career. Those were the questions over and over. I respect every single one of them. And I had an insight, and this is a closing insight that I want to share with you before we go to Q&A. Possibly the most mysterious and most efficacious card in the tarot deck is the ancient symbol and the culture-spanning symbol of the Wheel of Fortune, the ever-turning wheel of life. In tarot, this is pictured sometimes with mysterious beasts or combinations of humans and beasts rotating along this wheel, sometimes a combination of Hermes and Anubis, sometimes you'll see the Sphinx, sometimes you'll see the snake, a symbol of wisdom the world over, being from our own founding mythos in the book of Genesis. And it occurred to me that this turning of a wheel, it has a message for all of us, which is that life is, by its very nature, cyclical, and that everyone from the Hermeticists to the Taoists to the Transcendentalists agreed that if you want to understand life and if you want to understand yourself, study the cycles of nature, the cycles of the cosmos, the turning of the seasons, the revolutions of celestial objects, speaking of which we're 10 days away from winter solstice, the shortest day of the year, after which the sun begins to burst through into human affairs again. And every human community, from Polynesia to Siberia to Central America to the British Isles, has marked the winter solstice, this event, this celestial cyclical event that's occurring 10 days from now. And it seems to me that there's an esoteric message within the Wheel of Fortune. And that message is, stand your ground. Keep doing what you're doing. Dedicate yourself to whatever it is that matters to you in life. Family, art, whatever creative act, whatever you're attempting to get done in the world, can be anything. If it speaks to you, stay in that place. Stay in that place, because that wheel is going to come back around to you. It is inevitable, and it can be frustrating. It can be frustrating, again, as above, so below, yin and yang. Everyone in this room has been in a school or a workplace or whatever where you've watched somebody mediocre get goodies, and you've said to yourself, God damn it, that is not fair. And it is not fair, that's correct. Life is not meritorious. It should be, but it's not. That person is benefiting from the Wheel of Fortune. If a mediocre person is capable of sticking around for whatever reason, maybe dad owns the car keys, maybe accident, maybe a solicitous boss, maybe coworkers who make up for his or her errors, whatever it is. If a mediocre person can stick around long enough, the Wheel of Fortune will come back around to where that person stands and lift his or her fortunes. But there's a trick, and I'm going to share the trick with you of how to ride the law of cycles. Nothing can be done about the fact that the Wheel of Fortune benefits the mediocre person. It's just a fact of life. But if you, as a person of excellence, can stand in your place and keep doing your work, the Wheel of Fortune will turn around to you exactly where you stand and will lift you all the more because you have continued to stand on your spot. In life, one success can mitigate enormous amounts of failure. And I've asked myself why this is, and this is especially true in workplaces and in the arts. And it may be because while failure is inevitable, everybody wants to reap the fruits of success. And people will remember very intensively one success because they wish to be present when harvest comes back around, and it will, in its way, overshadow massive amounts of failure or setback. And the way to reap that one success that nature gives to us is to stand very solidly in your ground and allow that wheel of life, that Wheel of Fortune, to come right back to where you stand. It's said that there's a hidden power in persistence, and that's absolutely true. And I believe that absolute, unflinching persistence, absolute, unflinching persistence is not just a pull your socks up practical philosophy with which to move through life. It may be that, but these hidden tendrils of connection that I've been describing to you, sex transmutation, retrocausality, the bending of time, the focus that comes from passion, the actuality of psychical energies, and the cyclical nature of life mean that within persistence itself, there exists a causative ritual. There exists magic. And if you know the hidden currents that are feeding that persistence, those currents will announce themselves more fully and completely in your experience. So I thank you so much for giving me the time to share this with you today. This is where I've come to in my search for a practical magic, and it's a great, great pleasure to be able to share it with you all. Thank you. Thank you. We'll open up now to questions, comments, and please take the mic so our friends watching over live stream are able to hear you.
Yeah, just raise your hand and I'll keep track of who's around.
Hi.
Hey.
My name is Leo, and I guess I'm from an Indian reservation. I'm Sichangu Lakota, out west. And, well, just in a nutshell, I stand on being the world's purest 33 life path.
The world's, sorry?
Purest 33 life path.
Uh-huh.
And I experienced a lot of gnosis, and it just does not stop for like the past 3 years. So I wanted to ask, I've been isolated from a lot of communities, and I'm more or less looking for, this is what I wanted to say. When I came in, you were talking about abstinence, abstaining. I had unfortunate circumstances, relationship, sexless relationship, et cetera, depression, all that. Rock bottom, I ended up abstaining. It just became too depressing for me to be the one to always initiate, you know? And then finally I just stopped loving myself, stopped building it. After about 40 days, I experienced a sun consciousness. And I was the literal fucking sun. And it just blew my mind. And it helps me understand that my Lakota people, we sun dance. And it was very, very intense. It was very real. And I was actually with a female counterpart, another 33 snake, the night before, meeting them for the first time. And I believe that triggered it, like the caduceus, Mercury. Yeah. I was seeing 111 all the time prior to that. And so I wanted to ask, where can I find community? Because I'm not just, in short, I'm the only native food service provider here in the city. I've been among enough places with 2 pillars in the entrances. I've served a lot of people. And this world is here. It's all around. And I've been opening up both eyes to them now at this point. And I've recently committed the opposites, bringing them together, et cetera. But I would like to, not here, maybe have something to announce outwardly, but I would like to find community.
Yeah. My life has been one of exiting community. You know, that's been my life. I grew up in a traditional Jewish background. Congregational spirituality was the name of the game, and that was dissatisfying to me. And I've entered different esoteric groups, which I value, dedicated 8 years to the Gurdjieff work, which I value enormously, enormously. But I've exited communities myself. It seems to me that, so my work presently tends to be a solitary work, although I participate in exchange, obviously, like we're doing right now. Anytime I have found my way to a community that has proven helpful, it's usually been just through sheer affinity. Sometimes I'll get attracted to a certain persona. I remember vividly, I was attracted to the persona of Gurdjieff. I was attracted to the persona of Madame Blavatsky. I was attracted to the persona of Neville Goddard. And my attraction to these personas usually led me to people who felt exactly the same as I did. I had lots of experiences with community that I found dissatisfying. I revolted against not only the congregational model, but what might maybe loosely be called the encounter group model. I respect, for example, the 12-step model. I respect different esoteric groups and circles. I found I had to leave them at a certain point. The only thing I can suggest to you, if I had suggestions for a community, I wouldn't withhold them. The only thing I can suggest is that you encounter certain people and ideas with whom you share affinity. Follow that, follow that. That's the only thread I found that has led me to satisfying relationships and community. I would also say that it's better to be nobly alone than it is to settle for low company.
Especially being a snake.
Yeah, I think that I think being nobly alone is vastly better than settling for low company. I spent a portion of my life settling for company that was the wrong company, and I think I was saying at some point this evening that we as a human community have too many relationships. So I think that there is something to be said for being alone. I know it can be painful sometimes, but it can be painful being with people as well. You know?
Well, the thing about it is I've been experiencing a lot of synchronicities and alignments with pretty much everything having to do with 33. Yeah. I mean, even me being born of the year of the snake and my name is Leo, I see the manifestation of that on your left arm. Mm-hmm. My mom is a pure Virgo, you know, and the list goes on and it doesn't stop. Yeah. It's just like a lottery that I didn't ask for. Yeah. And so that's why I'm trying to look for answers, because when you come across enough synchronicities and coincidences, I'm beginning to believe that I'm the 33 that comes at the beginning of every eon. Yeah. And that's how do I find community when it gets to that topic? Right. Because that's when it becomes like really off.
I want to say more, but I have to move on because we have a lot of folks. But thank you.
Okay. Next, I'm gonna do boy girl. Are there no ladies with any questions? I want to do boy girl. Okay. Sorry to do it that way, but just to even.
I don't have a question, but I just wanted to thank you for having this event. I learned, well, I didn't really know who you were. A year ago, my roommate had told me about you, and she's like, you gotta listen to him. Just listen to Duncan Trussell. He's in the podcast. And I was like, oh, yeah, send it. Never listened. And I just wanted to say with the tendrils, because I thought you would really enjoy this, I had done an astrology reading on somebody, and I was out walking with my partner in Greenpoint, and I was like, man, maybe I need to get back into spiritualism and understanding that. And I had done an ayahuasca trip, and that was a very difficult thing for me because I realized how much I don't know. And after telling my partner that I was like, I need to get back into it, you walked past us.
Oh, right, of course. You're Dina.
Right?
Yeah. And he's Kyle.
Carl.
Yeah. Right.
And
well, thank you.
It was so, I was just kind of rejoiced because I was like, oh, holy fuck. I am experiencing the things that, are needed. Anyway, I just wanted to say this was such a powerful seminar, and I'm so happy to be here and to listen to you. That was it.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much. Thank you. My man.
Hi, Mitch. My name is Zaina. Thank you again for your amazing talk. I loved your book. It was so powerful. I especially like the chapter on spontaneous deity, petition. And I know there's a lot of psychedelic folks here, so I just wanted to mention my own personal experience with the combination of psychedelics and being open to that. I feel like you talked a lot about shortcuts. Like, I feel like being in the psychedelic space just throws open those doors, like opens those gates wide for a lot of those beings in non-ordinary reality to, have a more open and clear channel to you. And I've had a lot of very powerful experiences that way. So my question is, in the psychedelic space or otherwise, what advice would you give to navigating some of those new relationships that might be happening with deities?
I definitely believe in diving into the deep end of the pool. And, people will ask me, for example, this is not exactly your question, but it's an adjacency to it. And very typically, people within the traditions will ask me, well, how do you know when you're contacting these extraphysical beings or deities or whatever it is you want to call them that, they're not bad and going to hurt you? And like, have you been on social media recently? Do you see what we subject our children to every single day and ourselves to? It's life. It's simply part of life. I'm not going to tell anybody to close the door, because what's on the other side of that door could be extraordinary and could be wonderful. My God, 1/3 of the nation of Vietnam today has a religion called Cao Daism, which is an early 20th century religion that was channeled through a Ouija board. If someone had told French Vietnamese civil servant, don't use the Ouija board, and he listened, it would strip that expression from people. My only ethic on the path is reciprocity. I would never do anything to block another person's, knowingly, to block another person's reach for potential as I wish for it myself. I take reciprocity very, very seriously. I try to teach it to my kids. It really comes down to very plain things, so plain that people who are invested in scholastic philosophy, they find it boring, and good. I think that that reciprocal behavior is so critical and so vital. It has to do with keeping your word, plain dealing, paying people on time. My God, we could do a whole evening talking about money as a medium of human exchange. It's the primary medium of human exchange that we engage in, secondarily being sexuality. Look at how a person treats money, and you'll know everything about that person, ethically and otherwise. Everything is stripped bare in that space. So I think that relationships should be reciprocal. Disrespect gets no second chances in my outlook. I think we have to protect ourselves. I think having relationships within the psychedelic space and so on is wonderful. I do believe there's a lot of human cruelty. I think there's a lot of hostility. I don't understand this need that gets foisted upon us to have 3,000 friends on Facebook. I think I've long since left Facebook. It's absolutely poison. Just be careful, and just ensure that you're around people who behave in a reciprocal way. Don't give second chances if somebody's disrespectful. That's my perspective.
Hey, Mitch. My name is Evan. Read many of your books, love your work. Thank you very much. I wanted to ask you about something which I guess you alluded to a little bit tonight in The Wish, or I think in your other books you call it a definite aim. And you write about Neville and about visualization and something I think you call hypnogenia, the state.
Oh, yeah. Hypnagogia.
Sorry, hypnagogia, and that you should use it. You should use it to visualize and affirm and so forth and so on. And very interesting. But the idea that you have a goal in life and you visualize it, and I think Neville said you don't think about it, you think from it. You become it, something like that. And I think here's my concern. If you have a goal, I'm just going to throw out an example. You want to play guitar in front of a packed house. Mm-hmm. That's your goal. And you use the I'm sorry,
Hypnagogia.
Hypnagogia, and you visualize that and you feel it and you come from it. I think there's two challenges with that. One, it might not happen.
Right.
And two, it might take a very long time, and you might get frustrated. So what I found more useful is visualizing and imagining the process. So, for example, you might, if you want to play guitar in front of a packed audience, could be anything, you might visualize yourself practicing smarter and harder. You might visualize yourself putting your work out there. You might visualize yourself withstanding rejection. And I think the power in visualizing the process is that that's within your control, right? The outcome may or may not happen, but the process is something that you could do for the rest of your life. And I'm wondering if you've ever given thought to visualization of the process as perhaps being more powerful than the idea of visualizing the outcome and not worrying about how you're going to get there, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I totally dig that. I think that it's very important to give ourselves liberty from the how. How am I going to get there? And the teacher Krishnamurti was once speaking, this was 1964, he was speaking to a group of Indian teenagers. And one of the kids said to him, "You're telling us all these things, the importance of being an individual, the importance of following one's own path, but how? How do we do these things?" And Krishnamurti, who spoke with these kids with tremendous respect, said to him, "Sir, listen to me. When we use the term how, we very often don't want to do something." He said, if you were walking down the road and there was a cobra on that road in front of you, you wouldn't say, "How do I get away from this cobra?" You'd know how to get away. And the how sometimes becomes a dodge. And he said, these were Indian kids, and he said, when you want to play cricket and your mom and dad want you to do your homework, you sneak out of the window, you sneak out of the house, you steal away time, you find a way to play cricket. You don't ask how, you do it. And so the how can be tricky, the how can be problematic. There's a new book I have out called The Sixth Sense, and in that book I talk about this problem of the how can really get in the way of the enunciation of the very thing that we really, really, truly wish for. And the thing that we wish for, and this was something I had meant to cover in the talk, so I'm grateful to your question. The thing that we wish for, the wished for thing, can reach us in ways that we are apt to disregard. We disregard it because it seems perhaps so conventional that we can't imagine that this will be the solution. Or we disregard it because it seems so out of sync with our lifestyle that we can't imagine this would be the solution. And we can get very trapped in this within our subcultures. There are subcultures, for example, that might look down on something that somebody wants to do. Maybe think it's too careerist or too gauche or too materialist or too ephemeral or whatever. But that thing, that needed thing, may be right there in the form of a pill, or in the form of some medical procedure, or in the form of something that a person may be apt to think, well, that's not for me. You know, I'm not gonna do that. Mm-hmm. And we piss away magnificent possibilities, even miracles, I would argue, in our lives, because the how confines us to one avenue of deliverance. Neville used to talk about a bridge of incident. There will appear at a certain point a bridge of incident. And that bridge of incident might be through very established or conventional channels that we don't expect at all, or channels that go so far outside of my self-conception that I'm apt to wipe it away. And I really, truly, in my heart, I want people to feel a sense of liberty to avail themselves of any means that appear, because those means might be that bridge of incident that leads you to the thing itself. And the reference to hypnagogia is, just to for those who aren't familiar with the term, we enter a very deep, relaxed, meditative state twice a day, just as we're drifting to sleep at night and just as we're coming to in the morning. And there have been a whole variety of psychical research experiments demonstrating that that time frame, which is sometimes called hypnagogia, the morning state is called hypnopompia, they're both very much the same. That's prime time. That's prime time for psychical activity. That's the time to use a prayer, an affirmation, a visualization. It's very unique and supple time. Neurologists are studying it. It's a time where you may experience dreamlike imagery, even hallucinatory imagery, including noises, but you still have the power to direct cognition. Your rational defenses are down, and people who suffer grief will often describe those early morning hours as the most painful part of the day, or people who suffer anxiety will experience just the absolute gremlins of the psyche in those early morning hours, frightened, unable to sleep about something that they perceive is going to go on the next day at work. And then they get to work and it's not so bad. Happens over and over, and then the cycle repeats. It's because the rational defenses are down during those hypnagogic states. So they can be emotionally painful, but this is also a time that you can use through prayer, affirmation, visualization, and the how doesn't intrude because the rational mind is still somnambulant, but you can direct cognition. So people sometimes say, I can't meditate, but we meditate naturally twice a day. It's a very powerful time. So I encourage using affirmations, visualizations, prayers during that time.
Thank you.
Hello, my
Hi.
name is Maria.
Hi, Maria.
My question is in regards to what you were discussing. My phone fell. Around like the not sharing of visualizations or desires. But like, is there a moment when it can be shared? And I'm thinking particularly of like the power of collective creation, even through like the sexual act, that it's like something that is done collectively to create life, or, you know, in general, we can think of like millions of examples when people have created really powerful things together. So I'm wondering that it's like, how does one know when is the right moment to share? And then like maybe tools for creating magic collectively, or, you know, like ritualizing that, if you can speak of that.
Absolutely, that's such a wonderful question. I think that there are times where sharing can be practiced not only in a way that assures the protection of your wish, but that amplifies your wish, as you were just describing. But it seems to me it needs to be in settings of absolute shared values and harmony. One of the exercises I like in the work of Napoleon Hill is what he called a mastermind. I wrote a book called The Power of the Mastermind, and it's that very thing. Finding that time, place, and group that is appropriate to share and that can serve to amplify your wishes. So we speak about mob psychology in a certain way. Well, it's a real thing, but mob psychology is something it's very often used in a negative sense, but it can be used in a positive sense. I mean, we've witnessed, and some of us have participated in ecstatic religious experiences conducted in groups. And it can be done on a smaller, more intimate level as well. I think arguably that's what benefits the running of marathon runners. When they're running in a group, there's a kind of uplift that's felt very palpably. So I'm so cautious about counseling people not to share inappropriately, to abide the occult power of silence. But there are times and places where what might be called a mastermind or something else, some harmonious group function or setting allows the person to do that in a way that can be amplifying. And I think, listen, I think that that's probably at the heart of the 12-step movement, for example, which is very powerful and which helps a lot of people. I think that it didn't work in the encounter group being a kind of group therapy situation where people were supposed to call one another out on their bullshit. And I think that Encounter became a Frankenstein monster that was very problematic. And one of the founders of Encounter, Mike Murphy, agrees. And he has regrets about having helped pioneer the model. That didn't work. But there are other settings where it will work. And I'm sure some of you have probably been in settings through the use of psychedelics where there has been a beautiful emergence of an oversoul or group mind or infinite intelligence localized within Hermetic tradition. It was called nous, or a great overmind. And I think those moments are very precious and very real.
Hi, my name's Anna. I'm already a palindrome, so I like my name. I don't want to change it. You know, I want to preface this by saying that I was getting high trying to find a show about aliens, and that's actually how I discovered you. Glad I did. You know, I'm actually the lead researcher on the USO project for the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies.
Oh, bravo.
So, you know, I find myself in a lot of weird places. Over the summer, I was in Sedona at Bradshaw Ranch, and, you know, I had an interesting feeling, I'll say, where I felt like I should have made a wish. And I've never felt that way before. It was very strange. But then I felt overwhelmed by, like, the complexity of all the wishes I could make all in that moment. And I was like, well, analysis paralysis. What should I think about? What should I have done? And, you know, then over the summer, I ended up reading your book, and I think you're kind of talking about, like, you know, intention and how to set things. And, you know, I'm curious how you think about situations like that, and where do you really focus your energies?
Oh, wow. I mean, there are many places I focus my energies. I experiment with all the ideas I talk about. I have a variety of different practices. One of them is transcendental meditation. I'm very interested in new thought and variations of new thought and all the magical practices that I've been discussing, including deity, petition. I believe very strongly in a focused wish. One of the things I write about in The Sixth Sense is my belief that the wish itself may be the ultimate act of practical magic. The wish itself may be sufficient if it's deeply and passionately and rendered with this absolute unembarrassed truth within. I think that's a real wish. And I think just the internal enunciation of the wish may in itself be sufficient to enact the causative energies of the psyche. I published an article recently on Substack called The Power of a Single Wish, where I developed that thesis. And I feel that all of magic, in a certain way, everything I've been describing and all of the more thickly rendered ceremonial practices really are intended to arouse the creative energies of psyche. And those energies rest upon passion and absolute unembarrassed personal truth, which is another way of describing the wish. I believe that saying a wish at Bradshaw, or one of those places that has been the site of paranormal activity, is very valid. Here's a place, here's a way to enact a wish. How many of you, I wonder, have heard of the Soviet science fiction movie Stalker? You know it? Yeah. Watch Stalker. Enunciate your wish while you're watching Stalker. You know, as some of you are aware, in both the novel and the movie, which is a masterpiece, I think it's the greatest metaphysical movie ever made, leave it to an officially atheistic society, the Soviet Union, to finally figure out all of American metaphysics. It's funny, I'm wearing a Soviet wristwatch. And because when something is suppressed, that's when it can be explored without familiar forms. And within Stalker, obviously, as some of you are aware, there's the story of aliens come to Earth. Apparently, they don't like what they find. They leave behind them a place called the Zone, filled with all this space junk. None of us can figure out what the hell is it. The army blocks off the zone where the aliens were. It's very dangerous. The landscape is always morphing. Figures called stalkers will bring people into the zone. Within the zone, there's a place called the room. And the room will enact your deepest wish. But it can be horrible because no artifice is permitted. The room will enact whatever it is you really wish for. Not what you say you wish for, but what you really wish for. So it's very dangerous to go into the room without knowing what do I really want? And there's a whole subculture around stalker in Eastern Europe and other parts of the world where people will visit the site, this industrial site in central Russia, I believe it is, where the movie was shot, and they will make a wish. And I think those same energies can be enacted watching the movie, so I recommend that. And it's an absolute stripped bare portrait of our metaphysics. It's truth.
I think we have about time for 2 more, so.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Lauren. Thank you for this inspiring and insightful talk. I already added 5 of your books to my audiobook library while I was sitting here, so stoked to dive in. I'm an astrologer, and I was wondering what you might say to the naysayers in terms of planetary resonance and cosmic correlation and understanding the cycles that you described, like in the Wheel of Fortune, which was a very beautiful metaphor, by the way, and the efficacy of all of that in understanding ourselves more.
Thank you. What I would say to the naysayers of astrology is that we are a society of generalists. We have to be generalists. Not all of us can study and dissect everything. So we look to communities of experts, and we vest our trust in these experts, and we assume that they're doing the heavy lifting, and I can trust just what they're telling me. What the naysayers, who obviously haven't studied astrology and shouldn't be expected to study astrology, they have other things to do in life, what they don't know is that the experts in whom they're vesting their trust, they haven't studied astrology either, and that's the literal truth. And in fact, and I write about this somewhere, maybe in Modern Occultism, there's a French astrologer, now deceased, named Michel Gauquelin, and you've heard of him. And Michel Gauquelin did an intensive study of what he termed the Mars effect. And Gauquelin found an enormous correlation of highly significant placements of the planet Mars in the birth charts of people who are championship athletes. They might be Olympians, they might be pro football or baseball players, they might be great college athletes, whatever. And Gauquelin found, analyzing thousands and thousands of birth charts, that Mars had a very significant placement in the charts, the birth charts of champion athletes. And so along comes James Randi, the now dead soi-disant skeptic. And James got together with some of his buddies at an organization called PsyCop, Committee for the Investigation of the Paranormal. They didn't investigate anything. And, bless you, they reran Gauquelin's results. They got the same results as Gauquelin had gotten, and they suppressed them. They suppressed them. It led to a total fissure within the group. I write about this, I believe it's in Modern Occultism. And they doctored their own results because their results proved confirmatory of Gauquelin's efforts. So this is one example of what I mean when I say that the naysayers who believe that the rationalist experts have studied astrology and come away with the opinion that it's hogwash. What they don't know is that not only have the experts not studied astrology, but in one highly publicized and significant case, suppressed their own confirmatory findings. I take very seriously Western astrology, as well as Vedic astrology. My model is Western astrology because it's what I grew up with, and I could march through any number of arguments as to why it's psychologically and naturalistically efficacious. I absolutely believe that it is, and I think that it bears reflection. It bears reflection on the part of all of us that astrology is one of the oldest religious retentions to survive into the modern age. It's what got me into occultism. When I was a little kid growing up in Queens, I was fascinated with newspaper astrology. I still am, truth be told. Sally Brompton, New York Post, and I was just so fascinated, and I wanted to know. I didn't have the language, I didn't have the terminology at the time, but my burning question was, how did these ancient symbols and concepts from Mesopotamia survive across millennia to reach us today, to the point where virtually every person you meet knows his or her sun sign and can tell you something about it? And of course the cynic would say, oh, you know, they're just suckers. Are they? Are they? There's lots of practices from the ancient world that haven't survived. We don't bleed ourselves with leeches anymore. There's all kinds of things that we don't do. But that's the oldest continually practiced religious retention on earth. And I bow my head to that.
Okay, I think we have time for one more. Who's going to be the final? All right. And then Mitch will be here with Jacqueline in the back signing books. So if you have any questions, you can ask him then. All right. Last but not least.
Hey Mitch, Andrew, big fan. Really enjoyed your talk at Film Noir a while back. Wanted to talk about sort of how to balance not going too far with a desire, maybe even in terms of, you know, XYZ is my favorite book, I want to write something better. How do you maybe use that like friction of, maybe, you know, you've seen this in publishing, where people try to get sort of put into, you know, oh, X plus Y is the new thing, so do that. How do you like use maybe your jealousies or things that you are aware of to drive yourself into doing something creative, or just something in general with your life that is more uniquely you, but not discounting that, I wouldn't even call it the negative side, but just that aspect?
Well, I do believe that emotion ultimately rules the day, and that the wish in which the individual is emotionally invested is just going to keep asserting itself and asserting itself and asserting itself, sometimes to our alienation, which I think is why it's so important to be completely frank with oneself about that wish. I think our lives are littered with unacknowledged wishes, or wishes that we pushed out of the picture simply because they just didn't seem right or practical, or the how wasn't there. I won't give away the ending for those who haven't seen it, but I was talking about the movie Stalker, and in Stalker, for example, one of the stalkers, and I'm not giving it away, but one of the stalkers commits suicide because he enters the room with a certain wish, and he doesn't get that wish. He gets something else, but the something else that he gets is shattering to him, because it puts him face to face with a side of himself that he didn't really know existed. So instead of it being a joy, it's a terrible, terrible tragedy, all because he had been reciting an internal testimony that really wasn't true. I have had sorrows and agonies on the path of wishing that I'm describing. I would say that the line, if I can describe it in terms of a line moving in one direction or another, it's moved very positively in the direction of my wishes. But that's a very jagged line filled with switchbacks, and there are plenty of sorrows and plenty of agonies. But I find that a real wish, it has a claim on us. It has a hold on us. We can't get rid of it if we want to. We damn it and push it out the back door and vow to get practical, and then it just comes back in and comes back in. So I'm terrible with conditioning wishes. I always go for broke. I have an exercise that I've prescribed to people, and I've written about this several times. Imagine if you're in front of the proverbial genie in a bottle, and the genie says to you, I'm going to grant you your most deeply held wish, but on one condition. You have to tell me the absolute truth, or you're going to lose everything. And it's a terrifying experience because the individual might come face to face with something in him or herself and feel like, I don't like that, I'm not sure about that, that seems selfish to me. I suppose that's the tough bargain that life strikes with us. The individual will get what he or she wants, provided there's absolute honesty, absolute self-frankness. And to be frank with you, I've always permitted that to rule me based on the assumption that truth, emotion, passion, it's going to out itself. It's going to be felt. And the acknowledgement of the individual, of that truth, of that passion, makes know thyself, a phrase that we've all heard and that we all use, into a much wilder, more powerful, more efficacious ethic.
Can we all just give Mitch a round of applause?
Thank you all. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you all for coming tonight. We really appreciate each and every one of you. And there we go. Mitch will be in the back signing books. Please follow us on Instagram and on our website to follow all of the things that we're offering. We'd love to see you all there. Thank you so much, Mitch.